All right, I'm doing a count, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, transitioning, and this would all typically be done with no voice communication.
Hey everyone, Casmo here, and today I'm sharing this recent event I held with my Patreon supporters, specifically my Wingman and Air Mission Commander tiers. Wanted to do something special as a way to say thanks, so I organized a 2-hour event just to share some knowledge about helicopter operations. Brundus helped me out, and between us we have close to 8,000 military flight hours, so I figured we're probably good enough to teach some of the basics. Now these aren't the only ways to do this stuff, but rather just some ways we experienced in our own careers. The first 25 minutes or so are discussion, and then we hop into the private low-level hell Patreon server to demonstrate and practice.
All right, I've got 60 knots, climbing out.
Now, I'll apologize in advance as the audio isn't the best at times. My mic gain was a little high, and I do apologize and tried to cut some of that out for you. Purpose here at the time was really just participation, and I wasn't thinking too much about making this a video. If you'd like to support the channel and become a patron, you can check out my page. It's listed below. And I'll try to do events like this once a month or so, again, just as a way to say thanks for supporting what I do here. So let's get to it. Yeah, I think, and again, if there's something in particular that people are interested in, then let us know. But I think the number one question that people seem to have is just everything tactics related. And when we talk about multi-ship operations, there's really two ways of looking at it, right? There's the lift side, and then there's the attack scout side. And I would say the fundamental difference is size of the formation, but also the movement techniques of the two, right? So the lift guys typically will stick pretty close together. I always picture it, I don't know if there's any relation to this. I think there probably is. I think there was a manual that actually did talk about this, but why did B-17s fly in the patterns that they flew in? And I'm sure Biker Sid knows the answer to this, but it had a lot to do with the gunners, right? The overlapping fields of fire for self-protection. And I'm pretty sure that there's some semblance of that in the lift guys, how they fly together in certain formations, and having overlapping fields of fire for their door guns. When you look at the attack scout side, it's completely different, and it's a little bit more ambiguous of how they operate, because a lot of it's dependent on the threat, depends on what you're actually tasked to do. It can be as different as your altitudes, how you're gonna stack off each other. So we can kind of talk about that as well.
So the staggered formation is more of an administrative formation for just like a non-threat environment move, or like if you were lift and you're doing an air assault, they would probably fly a staggered formation, and all that stuff is briefed well beforehand. So all the way from when are we cranking to when are we conducting our comm checks, and then how are we leaving parking, and then where are we lining up, and then and lift guys love pro words. So instead of saying, all right, we're taking off now, it'll be some goofy thing like magenta, and then you gotta Irene, and then you gotta refer to some list to look up Irene, and then cross-reference that to mean we are taking off.
That's a good point. Let's talk about that just for a second so that people understand, because that stuff is real, right? It's called the X-check, the execution checklist, and you will see a preponderance of pro words during an air assault. And he's absolutely right, and it gets out of control. It's okay. This is the pro word for all the aircraft's engines are running. This is the pro word for, everybody's got gas. Like, it gets really down to the gnat's ass level, to the point that it's probably self-defeating. Because you've got 10 pages of pro words that you're trying to dig through, and in theory, it should all be in order, right? So it should be a checklist down from 1 to 900. That, okay, the next word is Irene, the next word is Tallahassee, whatever the case may be. Sometimes that gets a lot out of whack. It's one of those where you can overplan something, but you'll definitely see a lot of the X-check during an air assault. We as scout attack guys don't really use it too much unless we're a part, obviously, of the assault. But just in our own operations, it's definitely not something that we like to do.
And formation flying is hard, and it's not. Well, the scout and attack community doesn't do it a whole lot. So whenever we get an opportunity to, we try to fly formation administratively, like a staggered formation. But the cargo and lift guys do it habitually, so they're probably a little better at it, so to speak. And then things you got to worry about, like when you're in a formation, what if somebody breaks? Like if you're a 10 chalk serial or formation and number 5 has a problem, an engine chip light, and he has to leave the formation for whatever reason, like all those contingencies have to be accounted for. So there's a lead change contingency you have to brief. There's a formation change contingency. There's what happens when we cross the line of departure. We go from staggered to a straight trail formation. What happens if you got a 5 ship that's trying to infill an LZ or a PZ and lead gets dusted out and he can't land? Well, now you got 2, 3, 4, and 5 that don't necessarily want to follow a lead into the dust cloud. So how do you handle those situations? Because lead may elect to go around, or he may elect to commit to landing blind into the dust. But
Yeah,
so
I think like mechanically it's harder to be a lift guy because of all those contingencies that you really do have to worry about. I think conceptually it's harder on the attack scout side because there is no clear cut. Like we've got this manual and this is the version of the manual I think it is. I wrote this. Because this was before the first Afghan deployment in '09.
yep,
Because I recognized some things being very 160th because you remember who our boss was. But there's a lot of just kind of conceptual stuff that it's hard to just write down the book and say, okay, when you are at 1,500 feet and you are trail, this is where you should be. Like it just doesn't work that way. There's a lot of your own comfort, for instance. So really, it boils down to, okay, what are my expectations as trail? What are my expectations as lead? And then how do I get to the right spot in order to do that? And so I think, I don't know for you, Brendis, but for me, my go-to every time I was flight lead is just say free cruise. Like I don't really care what you're doing back there. Just stay out of my way, be where you're supposed to be, and we're going to be okay. And the only time I would dictate get on this side or that side is if it was something restrictive or, there was
yeah.
some reason that I needed you to be on the right or left side. But typically, I'm not going to get in your cockpit and tell you where the best place to be is. You can decide that for
You're
yourself.
talking about SWT or AWT.
Yeah, both. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, yeah, I never had a problem in the Apache with doing the same thing.
yeah. And half the time you're not even in formation. Like one guy's flying clockwise and the other guy's flying counterclockwise 500 feet above him, and you're doing some weird stuff. Like it's scout flying is so dynamic. You never leads lead's job is to find stuff, and trail's job is to never lose sight of lead and position himself where he can react to lead getting in a bad situation like within a couple seconds. Hey, you're taking fire, break right. Okay, I'm rolling in right behind you where you just were to suppress.
But yeah, it's a lot more dynamic. It's a lot harder to just read a book and say, oh, okay, this is how you do it. Versus the lift guys, I think it is easy, but then mechanically it's hard to do because just like you said, what if something happens, particularly on landings? That's where things get really dicey because if you're doing an air assault, you're probably landing somewhere where it's not improved. You're landing, it's dusty, or there's debris everywhere. Chalk 1's kicking up stuff, Chalk 2's kicking up stuff. Now Chalk 3, can he land? Does he commit? Does he do a go around? What happens to everyone behind him? And so there's a lot of those things that units rehearse. Well, I should say units should rehearse prior to doing the operation. I can tell you from observing many rotations at JRTC, they don't always rehearse those things probably the way that they should. But they also become a lot of SOP things like, okay, this is our go-to response to this type of scenario.
So it may be worthwhile talking about before we all jump in, the mechanics of large formation flying. So let's say you got 8 ships and you're in a staggered formation left or right. It doesn't matter. Lead has to think that there is a half mile so he's the head of the snake and everybody else behind him is the tail of the snake, or like a roller coaster. The tail is always moving way more than the head. So lead has to do everything. Like there is no rapid change in direction, airspeed, nothing. Lead can't do anything radical because the follow-on effects for 2, 3, 4, like everybody's reacting to the guy in front of them. So by the time you get to 6, if lead does a 10 knot unannounced airspeed change, by the time it gets to 6, he's basically standing up on his nose trying to not hit number 5 in front of him, because everybody's like, oh shit, we're slowing down. And so everything has to be very deliberate from lead as you're flying through the AO. If you're doing a formation landing to a airfield or an airport, the turns to final and base are nowhere near what you would do as a single ship. Like, you got to bend that turn around so that it's just like agonizingly slow. And then the trail guys are sucking in way more power just trying to keep up, because the radius of the turn gets wider and wider. So if you're 5 or 6, you're using generally 10, 15, 20% more gas than the guys up front, because you're so much more reactive in making constant power changes and speed changes. That's a little drastic, not 20%, but probably 15% more gas. But it's just harder to be in the back because you're constantly trying to react to what everybody else is doing in front of you. And if you're lead, you have to do everything with the thought that, hey, there's 5 other guys behind me and they're going to be reacting to what I'm doing, so I have to do it super deliberately.
Yeah, it's like driving with a trailer. You know, you got to think of it in that terms, or just picture that you're just flying a larger airplane now. It's like, okay, I'm not flying a Kiowa now; I'm flying a 747. You know, but you're right. You got to make these wide turns, and even with your mission planning, you've got to consider that with your route development. I know what is it? The book says if it's a night flight, you shouldn't have any turns over 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And that's to avoid, basically, yeah, you do this sharp turn, this 50, 80 degree turn. The guy behind you, I mean, you disappear to him, unless he's just Johnny on the spot with his goggles. But yeah, you should avoid these dramatic turns. And I think even daylight, you should avoid anything, beyond 30 degrees more than likely, if you have a large formation. But when you have a flight of 2, you're going to space it out quite a bit. And so it's not that big of a deal, because then it's almost like we're just 2 different aircraft doing our own thing. You can make that tight 90 degree turn onto final, because 2's well enough behind you that he can do his own thing. But when you're in an admin formation or you're a lift guy, then yeah, you're definitely going to need a lot of space.
So I got a question, role specific. So this would be more of a, I imagine you guys did it in the coin fight, but this would be more like, the Soviet horde is coming type of an idea, where you're taking maybe 10 lift guys. What would be the ratio, or would it just be mission specific? 4 Apaches for 10 lift, or does it just depend on the LZs?
You mean for like an area
security
for LZPZ security once they're in place?
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Wouldn't you guys go ahead and scout the LZ first, or is that not always the case?
Yeah, generally you'd task probably 2.
So there's probably not like a set ratio, like, hey, if we got this many lift aircraft, we want this many scout attack aircraft.
So the thing about any sort of air assault or airborne assault is there's a lot of stuff on the front end that's happening before that happens, right? So it's not a random, like, okay, we're just going to go drop 50 dudes off in this area and we've just done a quick search on the map. Yeah, we think we'll land them here. Like, it is, by the book, it's a 72-hour planning process to do an air assault. Now, that obviously can be truncated to much shorter depending on the size. But if you're talking like a brigade or battalion air assault, 72 hours is really the minimum to do it right. And so that includes a lot of, pre-reconnaissance of the area, a lot of synchronization. I'll tell you, at JRTC we did many battalion and several brigade air assaults, and we did a few airborne drops where you're dropping a battalion's worth of dudes on parachutes in conjunction with lift guys.
Can you talk numbers? What would a battalion air assault kind of look like, aircraft-wise numbers?
Well, so you're from a PAX standpoint, you're talking hundreds of guys. Obviously, you're not going to push all those guys in. So if you're just doing a battalion air assault, you're probably going to have anyway. I don't want to. I'm going to just get my head on myself. Okay, so what really happens when you do an air assault? the thing that it's a conversation between the air side and the ground side. And the ground side has to come up with a number and say, look, this is my minimum force that I can get on the ground, because he knows he's not going to get 400 dudes on the ground in one pass. Like, that's impossible. But what is the minimum that he can accept on the ground on the first go round to hold his position? So let's say he says, okay, min force is 130. Well, then he goes back, that goes to the Air Assault Task Force, and they work out, okay, how many aircraft do we need to get the min force there? And they'll try to do more. And 130 is a lot, right? So, I mean, you're talking realistically 9 dudes on a Black Hawk. I don't remember how many of the Chinook, realistically, but let's say it's 25 or something. That adds up pretty quick. And so they come up with these lifts, and they say, okay, we're going to push in 130 dudes on the first lift. And it's going to take, based on the distance and based on if they need to get gas or not. Because a lot of times these aircraft are not taking off 100% on gas, right? They're going to take just enough gas, because gas and troops, right? It's one or the other in some cases. So they're going to say, okay, it's a 15-minute flight to the LZ. It's 15 minutes back. So another 15 minutes. So, okay, we could probably do 2 turns before we need to get gas. So we can get you, 200 plus dudes on the ground within the first 30 minutes, and then it's going to be another 30-minute break before we can get another 100 dudes on the ground, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's absolutely no cookie cutter answer that says an air assault will consist of 4 Blackhawks, 2 Chinooks, blah blah blah. It is solely a math numbers game, and then when it comes to the attack side, it really comes down to what do we expect to happen once this air assault kicks off. No one really escorts the lift guys because they self-escort, right? I mean, that's why they have door gunners. You might fly the route ahead of them, but you're going you don't want to show up too early, right? You'll hear guys say you don't want to burn the target. The standard really is about 3 minutes prior to them landing, is that you're doing a what's called a cherry ice call. And typically that cherry ice call is cued to the Blackhawks being at a certain place, so that if you call and say, hey, it's cherry, they can hold, and now they're 7 Ks away, or whatever the spacing is. What's happening before all that stuff these days is there's some sort of persistent ISR overhead. So there's a Reaper, or there's a AC-130, there's something overhead that's looking at the LZ. And so when the Apaches show up, they already kind of know what's going on anyway, typically speaking. So there's all that front end that's going on, but there's really no ratio. And then it's just a matter of how long is it going to take to push all these troops in, and what are they going to do when they get there? Because the Apaches at some point are also going to have to go get gas. So do we think these guys are going to be in like hellacious contact, or do we think they're just going to land and kind of shoot a few bad guys and now they've held the area? If it's the first one, well, then you're probably going to need a second team of Apaches on standby. So what they'll do with the Apaches is stagger it. So, okay, the LZ, the H hour should be at midnight. All right, well, then we need an Apache team that's going to be on station at 11 or 23:55. They're good for 2 hours before they need to get gas. Okay, so we need another team that's available at that 2-hour mark. So they need to come in at 0100. Or be off the ground at 0100, so they're staggered, whatever the math works out to be. And that's how you get your continuous coverage. So I would say that the enemy situation is what's going to dictate how many attack aircraft you have. But the idea that you're going to have more than 2 on station for something like that is probably far-fetched, because there's only so much airspace. And you're really going to start running into each other. And then the airspace is probably going to be, depending on the threat, it's either going to be laterally or vertically deconflicted. So what we did a lot in the coin fight is just vertical, because no one's going to reach me anyway. So I would typically be 1,000 or above. The Blackhawks and stuff, when they came in, would be at about 500 and below, and they would just come in right under me and drop their packs off and get out of town. If you're doing stuff in a more high intensity type situation, well, then it's probably going to be lateral. It's like, okay, we're going to separate. We'll be on the north side of the LZ looking south. You guys are going to come in from the west and drop off, and then remain south and egress to the east, or something like that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yep, good.
Air assaults are very complex. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces that that just goes on the front end, and there's just a lot of other assets, and it's just a lot of math. I mean, it really is. It's a lot of figuring out, okay, this is the route, this is how fast they're going to fly, this is how long it's going to take, this is the landing pattern, this is the pickup pattern. I will tell you from personal experience that the pickup zone is just as important, if not more important, than the landing zone, because if the pickup zone is fouled, meaning the troops are not in the right place or they're not kind of divided up properly, it will slow everything down. I'll tell you a story of a unit that came through JRTC, and they were supposed to do a 2100 H-hour. It didn't happen until about 01, because when the aircraft showed up to pick up the infantry, and I was down on the ground with the infantry guys to observe, they were on the wrong side of the field, which was basically a dirt runway. They were on the wrong side. And so they started moving as the aircraft are showing up. And I told one of the other OCs I was with, I was like, you watch, somebody is going to do some math and figure out that they don't have enough gas to do this now. And so they loaded up all the troops, and they were running about 20 minutes behind. And suddenly the call came over and says, hey, we've done the math. We don't have the fuel to do this. We're going to have to go get more gas. Well, they can't get gas with packs on board. So they had to kick all the packs off, fly back to the FARP to get gas, come back in, reload all the packs. And yeah, by the time they took off, it was 4 hours later. All because the infantry guys were on the wrong side of the field. So the pickup zone is huge, and having everybody in the right spot, and it's like, it is herding cats, because you got Joes out there, hundreds of Joes in the dark, who are just they're standing where you tell them. And so some dude has got to be out there just putting the hammer down and say, this is chalk 2, this is chalk 3, you guys don't move, chalk 4, and then Rando goes off to take a piss, and it just gets out of control.
Can I ask, and tell me no if it's kind of outside the scope of what we want to do here, but I would appreciate and benefit from a simple kind of talk through of what the correct kind of startup and taxiing and organization procedures are as a helicopter pilot. I know how to fly, but I don't know how to operate in a real environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like anything else with the fixed wing guys. So, I mean, you're talking literally from startup, like who are we talking to and things like that?
Yeah, and even silly stuff like which are the right lights to use, and what's useful, and what's the right way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because Brennis and I just, for us, like, it's just kind of commonplace. So, but I'm fine with questions like that because we don't know what you guys don't know or want to know. Your lights it's going to be an SOP driven type thing. In Garrison, it's really going to be driven by the FAA, but your SOP is probably going to match that. Overseas, we typically don't mess with the lights too much. Kind of depends on the FOB you're at. Like if you're on Kandahar and it's huge, the enemy knows there's aircraft there. So you're probably going to have your anti-collision lights on and stuff at night until you get to a certain point. And again, that's kind of SOP driven.
So let's put it in terms of the server, right? So you got like Kerman Airbase, and then that little forward FARP on the east side of the lake that we had there too. So starting with Kerman Airbase, well, that's like Bagram or Kandahar. That's no different than operating on at Kennedy Airport in New York or Heathrow or whatever. Like there's Air Force C5s, there's fighters, there is formal ATC. Like you got everything procedural is very similar to what it would be back at home station. So you're full lighting on the airfield. You don't taxi around unless you got at night a landing light on, position lights, and anti-collision light probably. And you probably don't even goggle up until you are taking off and crossing the wire, because Bagram, Kandahar, etc., they're full lighting. Like there's nothing covert about those places. And then if you go to a forward location, such as that little tactical assembly area that we had set up on the east side of the lake, that would be more of a tactical scenario. So if you're cranked, it's probably covert lighting, at night. So they got IR chem lights strewn around. You probably are during the crank sequence. You don't have your goggles on yet, but once you get ready to take off, your goggles would come on. You'd go, we call it modified lighting, which would be anti-collision lights, visible anti-collision lights off. And you could go IR strobe lights and NVG position lights, which those are only visible on the wavelength that NVGs see. So in those, and there's probably no formal tower. There may be a tactical tower, which are Army guys in a air mobile sort of van that looks like a squished little tactical tower is what it is. And they have some rudimentary surveillance radars and things like that. Or maybe they just have one FM radio and they really can't see anything as far as surveillance radars. It all just depends on how forward and how, I'll call it expeditionary you are. If there are ATC guys with you, like if you had a general support battalion that had an ATC platoon, you may have some young soldier that is saying, you know, when you call up, hey, this is Spur 1-1, team of 2, Redcon 1 will be taken off in 5. That guy really has no authority over your movement. He's just going to say, Roger, we have you logged off at 23:30 Zulu. See you in 6 hours. Really, that's his only function. Or, you know, he'll give a traffic advisor or something like that. But they don't control your movement like they would in an airbase such as we're sitting on here. So in that case, the pilots are solely responsible for their movement in and out of the assembly area, and all coordination communications would be done. We call it either the air battle net, or it could be the FARP frequency. There's multiple different ways. It just depends on how it's set up there. So tactical, you're probably modified lighting where it's only NVG and IR visible. And if you're on a place like this, you're going to be full lighting until you cross the wire.
Yeah. As far as everything else, so the most important thing I think is communication. So when you get into the aircraft and you're going through your startup, the moment that you can get radios to work, so, you know, in Apache, basically once you get the APU going, somebody is tuning up and making sure that the right frequencies are in. Because making contact with your wingman and then checking in with whoever is kind of managing you at the airfield is important. A lot of times you got to call ground just for an engine start. So there's things that you need to do, and making sure that your comms is working is important, because it's probably going to take some time to fix if it isn't. And so you'd rather know that early on. So I would rather get my comms worked out before I worry about things like my weapons are set up and crap like that. Like, it literally should be one of the very first things that you do. Yeah. And you're going to do a comm check. So typically what we would do is you would have a briefed comm check procedure, where you would probably tune up whatever your team internal, you would have a team internal frequency for every radio. So in the Kiowa, we had 4, I guess technically 5 radios. We didn't really do it with the SATCOM, I don't think. Well, I guess we did do comm checks with SATCOM differently. Yeah. But you would have, whatever frequencies tuned up, and everyone would say they're ready for comm checks, and it would say, okay, comm checks in 5. And then, if I'm lead, I'm going to go to my radio 1, and I'm going to say lead on 1, and then I'm going to switch to my second radio, lead on 2, third radio, lead on 3, and just go down the list. And when I'm done, then Chalk 2 is going to go, and then Chalk 3 if there is one. And everyone's just going to go back down the list. And if everyone was heard, then you're going to say, okay, push mission set 1. And that's when you're probably going to stay on team internal for one of those. You're going to tune up ground on another one. You're going to tune up whatever headquarters element on another one. Whatever you've got set up for your mission. If somebody didn't hear you, that's where it's going to come out and say, okay, 2, I didn't hear you on UHF. And then it's going to be a pause, and 2's fiddling around with the radio, and now he's going to try again. Or you might determine that it's positioning, because sometimes based on where you're parked, the antennas don't work very well. And so you may just kind of write it off. You're probably going to do some sort of digital comm check, meaning you're going to, I'm going to send Brundis a text message via the Blue Force tracker, or in the longbow, we'll send each other something over the longbow net. You're going to do a digital in the longbow. We would always try to tune up the other guy's video, so I could see his TADs and get a handshake with him and say, okay, I've got your video, okay, you've got mine. But you're going to do all that stuff in addition to just setting up the aircraft and getting your weapons ready and your sensors and all that jazz. Which is why in the Apache it takes a really long time. Like starting an Apache mechanically is very simple. It's all of the systems that you're setting up. Because the FLIR, I mean, it could take 20 minutes before that FLIR is at a point where you can actually make anything out. And you're trying to optimize everything. So there's a lot of times where you'll start that thing up and you've got everything kind of done. You're just kind of waiting for stuff to catch up to you. And then it's like, okay, everything's ready. Okay, boom, turn the engines on real quick because you've been doing it all on the APU. Turn the engines on real quick and you're ready to go. That's why Apache guys really don't like to shut down, because once you shut down, that's it. Like you got to go through a whole bunch of stuff again versus I can just shut down the engines and go down to an APU and keep everything active. In the 58, we didn't have an APU, so you had to basically stay 100% power the whole time, because if you went to idle, you were going to lose one of the generators, the AC generator, which meant you were going to lose the sight, and I think there were some other little widgets, but yeah.
Hellfire.
Yeah. Yeah, so you basically just want to stay 100%. I'm over here with Burundus on the, where am I at? Is this the south side of
I'm in a gas.
Yeah, I got you. I'm across the taxiway from you, in a Huey. So I'm over here on the east side of the airfield with Burundus. And we can just kind of talk about or kind of demonstrate how we would do it if we were a flight of Kiowas or something. I'm not good enough in the Gazelle, so I'm not going to jump on a Gazelle. But we can kind of just go through that. If you want to be lead, I'll be trail. You can do the standard, whatever you would call the tower. We can taxi out to the active and then just do a team link up, call Eagle, all that jazz.
Let me figure out where I'm at.
Sure.
Oh, they don't have any taxiway markings on the F10.
Yeah, it's fine. Taxiway Alpha.
Okay.
It's fine.
All right, Kerman Tower, Spur 11, flight at 2 on taxiway Alpha. Request reposition for departure to the west.
And then Tower is going to tell him, Roger, approved as requested, blah, 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 whatever ATC crap. And he's going to give the altimeter setting, all that jazz.
All right, I'm talking on internal now.
Yep.
Trail lead, I'm picking up, and I'll be taxiing set up.
Roger. I'm at your 6.
And so, really, since we were already sitting there holding short of the runway, like we would have, to come out of parking, we would have called ground, and they would have told us to taxi, and then probably, so because ground doesn't have authority over the runways.
Yeah, ground's gonna, a lot of times ground and tower are actually the same guy. It's just a different frequency.
Sometimes, yeah.
And sometimes if the airport's not busy, they will kind of duplicate the functions on the same frequency. But yeah, you can kind of picture that as we're holding short of the runway. He's gonna transition us over to tower, and then tower. And really, honestly, in this situation, we would have just taken off from right there. Tower would just say, present position departure approved, blah, 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 blah. But going through the widgets.
Okay, so I'm set up. So the idea here is you set up, this is called a tactical T, or this is just kind of a team takeoff. Lead will face 90 degrees opposite of however many of the direction of takeoff. And this is so the right seat can look out at his following aircraft. And I'll set down, and depending, some units do it a little differently. Each unit does it a little different. So like without talking on the radios, we could turn off our anti-collision lights as we're ready to indicate that we are set, nothing left to do, we are ready for takeoff. So anti-collision lights would come off, and then once me as lead, I look and I see everybody's anti-collision lights are off without having to make any calls on team internal. I know, okay, everybody's ready, all the lights are off, and then we'd go lights back on, or it varies. And so I'm ready, so I'm going to make that call to tower. So Kerman Tower, Spur 11, ready for takeoff, departure to the west, negative ETR.
Roger.
And
request approved.
Yep, Roger. All right. So I'm going to pick it up slowly, and then I'm going to pause for a few seconds. Again, as lead, I'm not going to do everything or anything really like right away. I have to give everybody an opportunity to mimic what I'm doing. So I'm going to hold what I got for just a couple seconds. Everybody's going to come up. I'll probably do a slow 5 count. So I've already counted to 5. Then I'm going to turn in the direction of takeoff. And then I'm going to do another count. So 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I'm going to slowly transition into forward flight. Keeping in mind that everybody else is reacting to what I'm doing. So I don't want to nose it over and start hauling ass, because 4, 5, and 6 will never catch up. And then I'm going to transition through ETL, start my climb out, and probably, and this would be briefed, I would hold a set airspeed, probably 60 knots or so, until somebody calls the formation pro word, you know, saddle or football or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then once the trail guy says, all right, I'm saddle, lead knows everybody's up and out and transitioning into whatever briefed airspeed the flight was supposed to take.
Yep. So 2's Eagle.
Roger, Eagle. And really, you don't have to say any more than that, because per the brief, everybody should be doing what's expected as briefed.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. Before we go do these missions, you know, we're spending a good, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the situation, going through a crew brief. And a lot of this stuff is covered. So it's okay, when we take off, we're gonna take off to the east. We'll do free cruise. We'll climb up to 1500. We'll travel at 90 knots. Whatever you're gonna do. And so a lot of this is briefed. So he's right. There's not a lot of requirement to have conversation. If it's something just very benign, like we're just gonna go patrol, a lot of times, 2 would call Eagle and I'd say, Roger, Eagle, music, lighting, ACP, free cruise. And so that's just a fence check. Music meaning turn on your jammer, lighting, make sure your lights are off, ACP, your armament control panel, and then free cruise, that's what I expect you to be in. And I would just do that, just as a reminder, because I have been that guy with my anti-collision light on and a Navy SEAL tells me that my lights are still on. So.
And Tower Spur 11, flight of 2, turning left to the south of the field. I've got an engine problem, not declaring an emergency, requesting close traffic back to parking.
Manager approved, it was requested, enter left base for runway, blah, blah, blah. Clear to taxiway Alpha.
All right, so I'm on the downwind.
And if you guys are watching, you notice I'm not like tucked up close to him because there's no reason for me to be. I'm still in flight with him, but I'm a little bit behind him. And so if you look at this from a tactical standpoint, let's say we weren't going to the airfield. Let's just say we were flying along. Because we're higher, I want to be further away from him, because if he started taking fire right now from that town to his left, I can nose it over and actually do something. Whereas if I'm really close to him, there's nothing I can do. I'm too close to whatever I need to react to.
For Spur 11 left base, direct to Cav parking. And Spur 11 approved as requested. No traffic.
And so
All
now
right.
that we're landing, I can cut inside of his turn and just get closer to him. I'm going to stay out of his way, but now I can tighten up, because the ATC doesn't want you to be all scattered out because you're slowing down his traffic pattern. But right now I can just cut inside of him and get a lot closer because I know what he's doing.
All right, trail lead, I'm lining up for runway 34 or whatever, or what runway is that, in fact? I can't tell. Anyway, it's the runway. I'm going to go for the numbers and then use taxiway Alpha back into parking. I called for direct to parking, but I'm going to land to the runway.
2. Yeah, and so that's the thing too. As a helicopter, a lot of times ATC doesn't even want you to use the runway. Just kind of depends on the situation, but if it's busy and they can clear you to land on a taxiway, they will probably do that, so that you don't gum up their runway. So that taxiway just to the right of the, as we're looking at it, just to the right of the runway, you could very easily be cleared to land taxiway Alpha or whatever.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go for the second set of hash marks. I'm continuing to slow, so I'm about 60 knots right now. So throughout that turn from downwind to base to final, I slowly allowed my airspeed to decay from about 160 knots to about 60 knots now. Not 160 knots. What's 200 kph?
Yeah, whatever.
About 110 knots. And just doing everything real slow and deliberate. Right on below ETL. Tower Spur 1-1, approach end runway 3-1. I'll be taking taxiway Alpha. Roger, contact ground.
See, and because this runway is so wide, like I didn't need to go straight trail, but if it was a narrow runway, then I might just move in a straight trail behind him. You don't want to fly straight trail unless you have to, because you just don't get the cues for closure when you're directly behind them as you would when you're offset. So, and then once I'm clear, I'm going to tell him 2's clearly active, because he's the one talking to tower.
And so for like a large formation approach like that, there's a couple of ways to do it. So lead can plan his approach taking into account the size of the formation. So if he wants the trail aircraft to end up over the numbers on the threshold, he would execute his entire approach to however he estimates the formation is large, right? So he would just shoot his approach all the way to halfway down the runway, and everybody kind of comes down all as one unit. The alternate technique is sort of a progressive landing to a point. So everybody's in trail, lead shoots his approach to the numbers, and then doesn't slow down. He just continues almost in an air taxi. So he hits that point and just continues to transition forward. 2 hits the same point, continues to transition forward. Like that's everybody's landing to the same point, but nobody is stopping.
Yeah.
Because if lead stops on the approach end of the runway, well, he's got a quarter mile of aircraft that now have no place to shoot their approach to. We'll line up for a large form.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, I'll tell you what. I'll be lead. I'll go to the about midfield. We'll take off 2-9, same direction. I'll go about midway up the runway, past Biker there. Biker, if you want to be number 2, line up on me.
And I'll just stay out of the way.
No, so we'll do a staggered right. So Phil, you're going to be 45 degrees off my right. 3 will be 45 degrees on the other side, staggered to the left. And since we're not armed, it would be feasible for us to line up straight, but if you're on an armed aircraft, typically you would line up in what's called a herringbone to keep your weapon systems from being oriented on the guy in front of you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and land mid runway.
But you guys can see already, I'm sure, this is why it's important to have a good brief prior, because when you're trying to, not all these aircraft are going to be parked next to each other when you taxi out to set up these formations. So you could have guys coming from the other side of the parking area and trying to join up. And there's no F10 map, so,
Come a little bit tighter, Phil. I mean, Biker.
Roger.
That's about right there. So if everybody can see that spacing, that's about what we want. So 3 is going to be lined up on the left side of the runway. And for operating in a garrison environment, you may be talking to ATC as a flight. So we're going to divvy up the responsibilities. For instance, lead obviously has navigation responsibilities. 2 might have talking to ATC, 3 may have backup nav, whatever the case may be. And since we're all transponder equipped, and if you were single ship, everybody would be squawking their own codes. What would happen is, most likely, we're going to brief that everybody remain transponder standby, and Casmo is going to pick up the squawk for the flight. Because having 9 aircraft together jammed up on a scope with overlapping codes is not a good day for ATC. I'm sure Deddy can talk more about that.
Yeah, and you're going to distribute the lighting as well, right? So if you are kind of going up full FAA lighting, I kind of picture it as the formation becomes one big aircraft. The lead guy is probably going to have his landing light on. The trail guy is going to have his anti-collision light on. Because you don't want 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 with their anti-collision lights on, because 7 is going to get flicker vertigo, right? He's just going to see all these lights flashing in his face.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to have like your position lights, on standby or on dim, if it's night.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I was talking about how to indicate that you're ready to go. So during the daytime, maybe anti-collision lights are not so visible.
Yeah.
Another indicator is you don't set down until you're ready to take off.
That's right.
So once you set the aircraft down, you're indicating I have nothing left to perform. You're telling lead we are ready to take off. So you could assume position, but if you still have hover checks to do, power checks, whatever, you would just remain out of hover until you're all done. And then once you set down, you're telling lead, I'm thumbs up, I'm good to go.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay up. Phil's scooting up just a little bit. I'm going to scoot up a little bit. And again, there's no shame in calling on the radio. If it's an 8 or 9 ship flight, there's nothing wrong with it. But that is definitely a way that you'll see guys do is just place it on the ground. It's indicating that you're ready to go. All right, so.
And I can barely see you way down there. Okay. Kerman Tower, Spur 11, flight of 9, lined up 29, departure, ready for takeoff, departure to the west, negative ETR. And Spur 11, Kerman Tower, clear for takeoff, winds 290 at 9, altimeter 2992. All right, I'm doing a count, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, transitioning, and this would all typically be done with no voice communication.
And try and remember, you're flying the guy in front of you's wing. Don't look at it like I'm not looking at the guy in front of me. I'm looking at Phil because he's at my 1 o'clock. I'm flying off his wing. He should be flying off the guy's 11 o'clock wing. And that's how you'll kind of keep your spacing.
All right, I've got 60 knots, climbing out.
Roger. We got a little bit of a gap.
It's me.
Yeah, you're fine. I mean, this happens. I mean, it's not easy. Now it's me, so.
Well, that's also one of the perils of flying multi-aircraft formations,
Yeah, absolutely.
and why it changes your risk assessment so much.
Yeah. All right, 9 saddle.
Roger, saddle.
It's all right. I'm gonna kind of break off formation and just get some visuals here.
All right, I'm leveling off. Try to hold 150 kph, 90 knots. And we're gonna set up for an approach to 29.
And really, I struggle to think to really seeing a flight greater than like 6 aircraft. I know it happens, but tactically, I don't think I've ever really seen an air assault do more than 6. Because if you get more than that many aircraft, you'll probably put them in different serials. So you'll have like a flight of 6 Blackhawks followed, 2 minutes later by a flight of 4 Chinooks or something like that. You're not going to have these massive Mongoso flights of aircraft. And part of it is, I think, for this reason right here, that it's hard to maintain a formation. Because when you're in the back, when you're number 6 or 7, it's hard to hold your place.
And somebody's going to break, and you're going to have to make changes anyway.
Yeah. And 2, when you have Chinooks, and I never thought about this, the Chinook guy told me this one time. He's like, we don't like Blackhawks following us. We'd rather follow them. He's like, because when we slow down, it doesn't look right to a non-Chinook guy. We don't pitch our nose up in the same way. And so hot guys, sometimes they don't recognize that a Chinook is slowing down through the normal visual cues that they're used to. And so typically you're going to see Chinooks flying their own flight, unless it's just a really small package of, like 2 Blackhawks and a Chinook. Well, then, yeah, they're all going to fly together. But you're going to try to keep those types of aircraft separated.
Yeah, we crashed a Blackhawk into Baghdad, 2-ship Chinook and lead, and the Blackhawk and trail.
Yeah.
Chinook tried to picked up the LZ late. and you know, did a real quick decel when the Black Hawk ran out of power trying to keep up, and
Yeah.
drooped it and went in.
Yeah, you'll see a
Great.
lot of the. Go ahead.
Flight lead, I'm going to be coming down to base altitude. I'm going to come over the water, left turn to 29. So we didn't brief. Typically, we're 9 aircraft, so we'd probably stay in a staggered, because if we went straight trail, it would go on for miles.
Yeah.
But if you're 4 or 5 aircraft, you probably slide into straight trail.
Yeah, this looks good. I mean, you guys have good spacing across the board. It's not equal, but that doesn't matter. Everyone's at a good slow pace.
All right, I'm at 60 knots, continuing.
And this doesn't qualify as Blue Angel flying?
Not quite. Got a little bit to go. But the point is, no one's having to do any, like, whoa boys. You know what I mean? Like, no one's yanking, particularly you, who is in chalk last right now. You're not having to yank the nose back. Everyone's at a predictable speed. They know where they're going, right? Because lead has already told them, hey, I'm going midfield. So everyone can figure out where midfield is and kind of figure out, okay, I know where I'm shooting my approach to. There's nothing crazy happening. And you want to have enough space because you know that he's going to have to leave the active. So he's probably going to leave the active up there at the next taxiway. So,
All right, I'm a beam Delta. I'll be turning right on Delta.
That's
This
weird.
looks
Usually
pretty,
the crowd
this
just
looks pretty
glue.
awesome, though. I dig it.
yeah.
Our
So, yeah.
tips are about to touch Echo.
Oh.